This man pretty much needs no introduction to many people who frequent St. Bride. Bob is often described as one of the actual treasures of this brilliant institution, and he works with our fantastic library team, Sophie and Alicia, and also pretty much needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Bob was born in 1955 and trained as an art teacher at St. Mary's College of Education, part of Newcastle University. In the spring of 1977, he joined the BBC, working at the presentation department and later for BBC exhibitions. He spent over 30 years as an assistant in the graphic design department at the BBC and took early retirement in 2012, where he joined the team at the St. Bride Library as library manager, where he remains as a part-time member of staff over a decade later. During that time, he has come to know and care for our collection inside out, well, almost as much as anyone possibly can. And when he comes across something new or interesting, he notes it down in a special little black book. And he is here today to discuss and share with you some of the more innovative and interesting treasures in the St. Bride Library collection. So, with further ado, I would like to introduce Bob Richardson to the stage. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. It's all scripted because those of you who've heard me talk before will know that it tends to spread a bit and it can be longer than the 27 minutes that I've timed this at. Well, welcome to the Bridewell Hall, which was originally designated as the reading room when this building was first opened in 1894. As Becky just said, I've been a part of the library team since 2012. And one of the key words in the promotional material for today's conference is innovation. So I went into the collections to look for material which represents innovation in the printing trade, in the technology, in the cutting edge changes to the way the printed material has been produced over the last century and 125 years or so that the library has been in business. This hall has been the location for countless talks and lectures, but also the place where new inventions have been demonstrated, where experiments have been carried out in front of distinguished audiences such as yourselves, some more successfully than others, as you will soon find out. This slide behind me is Fleet Street in 1891. It comes from a collection of lantern slides that we have in one of the in the library collections. This is from the date when the St. Bride charity was set up, 1891. Now, the sharp-eyed amongst you may notice a pub on the left called The Old Cheshire Cheese. Mysteriously, in the 20th century, it became Ye Oldie Cheshire Cheese, for reasons I can't explain. St. Bride Library is a temple of innovation to the printing trade. Now, this clicker should move on, I believe. Yes, it works. Fantastic. I'm not great with technology, so keep your fingers crossed. It's a temple of innovation to the printing trade, particularly during the era of letterpress. And here you will find books and documents, diagrams, plans, machines, and artifacts which chart these developments. In the next half hour or so, I'll be looking at some of the unusual pieces in the library collections which reflect innovative technologies which were sometimes ahead of their time, or in the case of my first item, quite a long way behind its competitors. Now, this little yellow book, which you see on the screen behind me, turned up a few years ago when we were rearranging the stock in room 19, our main book stack. The book itself isn't particularly eye-catching, apart from the colour, but the name on the cover certainly is. Bram Stoker, the man who created the legend of Count Dracula. Why was this slim volume marked with Stoker's name? Well, it was the sender of the book who proved to be of much greater interest. This slim volume is a promotional piece to encourage investment in a then new invention, the Page Compositor, an automatic typesetting machine which it was claimed would revolutionize the production of books and newspapers at the end of the 19th century. I will quote the primary investor who said, "There's millions in this." It wasn't the first machine of its type. Automatic typesetting had been the holy grail of printing engineers for many years. Indeed, the bicentenary of the first patent was last year when Dr. William Church's machine in 1822 was registered as British patent number 4664. Most of you, or many of you, will be familiar with this image from the Mechanics magazine of 1842. It's the famous Young and Delcambra machine, patented 2 years earlier. The two operators, fugitives from a Jane Austen novel, suggest that some kind of sexual equality was emerging in the printing trade in the middle of the 19th century. In fact, absolutely nothing could be further from the truth. The rarely seen text which describes this machine makes it quite clear that women and children could operate the machine because they were cheap, much cheaper than men. So cheap, in fact, that 7 women and children were needed to operate it, making adjustments to the mechanism and keeping the channels stocked with type and so on. Because like its predecessors and many of its successors, the Young and Delcambra machine was a vending machine. It couldn't make type, you filled it with type. Type was released when a key was struck. And women operators in the image also served to underscore, and the ladies in the audience are going to hate this, the utter simplicity of the machine. That was one of the ways they tried to sell it, that if a woman could operate it, anybody could operate it. They wouldn't get away with advertising like that today. Downright insulting. Samuel Clemens was the man who sent this little yellow book to Bram Stoker. And it's his signature which is inside. The dedication is from Samuel L. Clemens to my friend Bram Stoker. Clemens had invested enormous sums of money in the development of the Page compositor. All of his royalties from Huckleberry Finn, much of his personal fortune, and his wife's inheritance were all ploughed into the development of this white elephant. His personal stake was around $300,000. That's $8 million in modern equivalent. The Page machine was a money pit, clunky, temperamental, relying constantly upon mechanical adjustment. The machine could only cope with a single type size and could not use standard printing types, only those that had been specially cast for the device. Clemens annotated his copy of the book, underlining various features of the machine. On page 17, pardon me, on page 17, he has changed the text to say that the Page machine does the work of 15 compositors rather than the 10 which appeared in the original. So this little yellow book is in fact a begging letter, asking Bram Stoker for funds to further develop the machine. But the linotype was already well established in 1892, when Stoker received this book, having been used on newspapers since 1886, when the first machine was employed to set the New York Tribune. The Page compositor was effectively obsolete at the point when Clemens asked Stoker for money. Although wealthy through his association with the actor-manager Sir Henry Irving, Stoker's greatest success, Dracula, was 5 years away when this little yellow book was received. And when Stoker died, he was worth less than £5,000. So it's unlikely that he would have had much money to invest. Clemens was bankrupted by the machine. His investment in the Page compositor wiped him out. The total investment eventually came to some $800,000. And Clemens spent the rest of his life trying to repay those who he had misguidedly persuaded to invest. The linotype machine, of course, transformed the way in which newspapers were printed here in Fleet Street and around the world. But there were other innovations in newspaper production. Newspapers in the first half of the 19th century rarely carried illustrations of any kind. The death of Nelson in October 1805 prompted the Times to give over a single page to the design of his coffin on the 10th of January 1806. His funeral was delayed because it was a state funeral, which obviously took some planning, and his body was pickled in a barrel of brandy to get it back to London in good condition. Illustrations delayed the production of newspapers, and they occupied valuable space that might be sold for advertising, so they were generally ignored. We have a copy of the Times here at St Bride. It's actually a later reprint, but it's essentially the same illustration. That all changed with the launch of Britain's first fully illustrated daily newspaper. The first issue of the Daily Graphic appeared on the 4th of January that year. It contained a remarkable 41 images. The process for making half-tone, that's photographic images, dates from 1881. But it would be another decade before the technique was perfected. In 1890, it simply wasn't possible to illustrate a daily newspaper with photographs. The half-tone technology, that is, the technology which allowed the printing of photorealistic images, required considerable preparatory work and the right kind of paper. Newsprint wasn't quite up to it. To use them on every page of a daily newspaper in 1890 was impossible because of the effort required, and particularly the time-consuming make-ready, which was required on all of the presses. The Daily Graphic sprang from The Graphic, a lavishly illustrated weekly magazine founded by wood engraver William Thomas in 1869. To produce an illustrated daily newspaper was pushing technology to the absolute limit, and so it required certain compromises. We hold copies of the very first Daily Graphic here at St Bride. Indeed, the title issued a teaser edition about a week before the launch, which we also have. Wood engravings were not an option, with the exception of a few regular pictures, such as these rather charming daily weather report headings. These were true wood engravings, and these were used for the first 10, 15 years of publication. But to produce the kind of image that the Graphic had been using for 20 years was impossible on a daily basis. The compromise was to use line illustrations, and a group of artists were engaged for that purpose. The Daily Graphic had to explore new methods of turning around pictures for publication at high speed, and they did this by using photography as the basis for many of the images that were published. An artist would operate in one of four ways. He would he would be present at an event and he would sketch what he saw. Or he would create an illustration in black Indian ink using his imagination, which was the only option when exotic foreign locations had to be depicted. Alternatively, he would be provided with a photographic enlargement, which he would then redraw on a separate sheet of paper, or he could work directly onto the photographic print in black Indian ink, and that would then be bleached chemically to remove the original image, leaving just the line drawing. Here we see a sketch of the artist's studio as it appeared in a celebratory edition of the Daily Graphic. And here we see the photograph from which that sketch was made. The artist made a few changes, in part to make the young messenger boy less prominent. You can see him in the center there, leaning on the left of the image. These illustrations were extremely effective. When the Daily Graphic had been published for a year, the paper produced a special anniversary issue. It's a fascinating publication for several reasons. The publisher's editorial, as you can see, appears to be handwritten rather than set on the linotype. This was to add a personal touch. But the letter to readers admitted that there had been difficulties, accounting for some of the teething troubles experienced with the new technology. This image is my favourite from that issue. The caption says, "An accident with the folding machine." Sadly, we don't have the photograph which inspired this. The newspaper had failed to appear on a few occasions or was late on the streets because of technical boundaries which were being pushed sometimes beyond what was achievable. We also hold a complete set of magic lantern slides, which were issued commercially in 1898 under the title "All About a London Daily, from the Paper Mill to the Breakfast Table." The photographs in the set were largely taken at the Daily Graphic Printing Works around 1891, when they celebrated their first anniversary. And they show many of the departments involved in the production of the newspaper. This is one of the page forms ready for stereotyping. The company which issued the slides also provided a printed script, so presentations could be made to assembled groups such as the one we have here today. And rather charmingly, I discovered when sorting through the slides earlier that advertising breaks were also provided for the slide sequence. Here are 2 adverts for Swan pens and for Pears soap. Incidentally, the caption under the image on the left says, "I used your soap," he's a scruffy old tramp, "I used your soap 2 years ago, and since then I have used no other." This is the process photography department at the Graphic, where the artist's drawings were turned into line blocks. On the left is the image which appeared in the anniversary edition, and on the right is the same room from a photograph, but taken from the opposite end. The large rectangular object is a brush arc lamp. You may notice as well that the artwork on the left-hand side is at the other end of the room, because the camera, in fact, has a sort of periscope attachment. They couldn't quite get a long enough throw for the enlarger, so they used a periscope. Although the Daily Graphic was using the latest methods of production, there were some practical compromises that had to be made. Innovation did not always mean cutting-edge technology. On the roof of the Daily Graphic building was a pigeon loft, stocked with homing pigeons. For an event like the Derby at Epsom or the University boat race on the Thames, an artist would take a sketching pad, pencils, and a pigeon. A rapidly executed sketch on the finishing line of an event would be attached to the bird's leg, complete with brief details of the result, and it would be sent back to the publication office. Here we can see the artist releasing a pigeon, and there it is being received on the roof of the Daily Graphic. That would then be finished as a piece of complete artwork to go before the cameras. By 1926, when the Daily Graphic amalgamated with the Daily Sketch, line drawings were largely obsolete, and like most other daily newspapers, the half-tone photographic image reigned supreme. The Daily Graphic was printed on high-speed rotary presses using traditional printing ink, which is a blend of boiled linseed oil and soot. And the formula hadn't changed much in 500 years or so. But in the late 1890s, it appeared that might become old hat, as yet another new technology emerged. This is William Freeze Green, the father of cinematography, although Thomas Edison might have challenged him on that. Freeze Green was an inventive genius, but he never became rich. He has 76 patents to his name, but was bankrupted many times and imprisoned for falsely obtaining credit to develop yet another of his ideas. Freeze Green had a butterfly mind and a very low boredom threshold, and would abandon a promising idea when something more interesting or exciting came along. Printing without ink was envisaged as early as 1863, when Wood's typographical advertiser suggested that chemically impregnated paper might do away with all that grubby ink business. William Freeze Green developed a process which applied an electric current to the type, which was pressed against specially sensitized paper. The circuit was completed through the platen of any standard press, and an image was produced entirely by electricity. The process worked, and a patent was granted in 1897. Paper needed to be impregnated with a mixture of chemicals, including sulfate of iron and carbonate of ammonia. The process was demonstrated at the Croydon Camera Club, where a group of investors were sufficiently impressed they were sufficiently impressed to form a company to exploit Freeze Green's new process. Frieze Green, always desperate for cash, received £3,000, £15,000 in shares, and a seat on the board, and an annual salary of £750. A company, the Electrical Inkless Printing Syndicate, was formed. The first public demonstration of the new process was here in this building, in this room, in the Bridewell Hall and other rooms of the St Bride Institute on the 24th of June 1899. 800 invitations were sent out. Now, how many people here today? 100? Maybe a few less. 800 invitations were sent out. This was a big event. And this is one of the invitations behind me, printed in 3 colours on thick pasteboard, but not electrically, printed very traditionally. This was a relatively new building in 1899, and it was equipped with newfangled electricity. But it was alternating current. Unfortunately, electrical inkless printing, as demonstrated at the company headquarters and described in the patent, used direct current. So there was a technical problem on the big day. The special paper failed to arrive. A subsidiary was later set up to make this paper in a Bramshot, in a paper mill. But on the night, the paper wasn't available. The syndicate had set up a small Wharfdale press in here, 2 platen presses in other rooms, and a model of a newspaper press. As the sensitized paper wasn't available, the decision was taken to make some on site by dipping sheets of ordinary paper into a bath of chemicals. But the paper was still damp when the demonstration took place, and it smelled very strongly of acid. The prints were brown, and no strong blacks could be produced. Because of the voltage problems, the presses also had to be turned by hand. Despite these problems, the trade press were indulgent. Reports were generally positive, apart from the printer's register, which was highly critical of the process for personal reasons. The editor had not received his invitation, so that he didn't see the demonstration and was irked by the snub. His report was less than kind. He did, however, turn up at the head office of the syndicate the next day and ask for a personal demonstration. He was sent away as it was not convenient, further adding to his ire. He was asked to return the next day when several presses had been hurriedly set up, and forgive the pun, but he was not impressed, reporting that the images were completely unsatisfactory. The colour is irregular and blurred in appearance. The print shows through to such an extent that backing, that is, printing on both sides, is not possible. He ended by saying, "It is of little practical utility to the master printer." The Register Review was mean-spirited, for electrical inkless printing was capable of very high-quality work. This image of a lich gate on the left shows just how good it could be. It captures all the very fine detail. And many of the promotional pieces were extremely crisp and sharp when the right paper was used and the voltages were correct. The main disadvantage was, like any photographic print which hasn't been properly fixed, these images tended to turn a little bit brown. They became discoloured. They didn't have longevity, which was an issue that Frieze Green was convinced he could sort out. He could eliminate that problem. But it wasn't the negative reviews which killed the process. Infighting amongst the syndicate members would eventually bring about its downfall. Frieze Green, with the cash given to him by the investors, had by then, because of his low boredom threshold, moved on to other projects, like his patent advertising hat, patent number 29363, which projected moving pictures from inside of a top hat onto a screen carried above the head of the operator. You must all remember that one. One of the investors in the syndicate was Charles Drummond, who was a trustee here at St Bride. In fact, he was the boss at St Bride Foundation. And he had assembled a very important collection of documents relating to this doomed enterprise. It's quite a substantial archive, and it's here at St Bride. Our former librarian, James Mosley, arranged a very important exhibition some years ago, which featured this material. And he was also instrumental in replicating the public launch of the electrical inkless printing syndicate at a reconstruction of the process here in the Bridewell Hall in 1964. Sorry, I've missed an image out, but the experiment which was carried out here in the Bridewell Hall in 1964, almost 60 years ago, was no more successful than the original experiment in 1899. We have examples that were printed on the press that James set up. The power supply was two 6-volt car batteries, and it was okay. It was readable, it was legible, it wasn't great. It gives you an idea of how the press must have felt on the night of the original demonstration. Sometimes innovation takes a step backwards, seeking inspiration from an earlier era. I'm going to end with a discovery which was made not here, but at the Type Archive, now sadly closed. It comes from the archives of the Monotype Corporation and has not been seen or widely appreciated. 60 years ago, Monotype were pouring their resources into the development of their photo typesetting systems and also laser comp. They were moving away from hot metal composition. They could see that the lifespan of hot metal typesetting was finite, and they had to look at new technologies to continue as a successful provider of typesetting services. Monophoto was commercially successful, and it seemed to be the future of the business. Hot metal was coming to the end of its useful life, and photosetting was cleaner and much easier in many ways. Incidentally, our friend William Fries Green, amongst his 76 patents, has the earliest for a photosetting system dated 1898. A note in the Annals of Printing, a book by another St Bride librarian, William Turner Berry, says that Fries Green was too busy with other projects, that sounds familiar, to develop his device for the setting of alphabetical characters by photographic means. That sounds about right for William, who was also involved in the electrical inkless printing syndicate at the same time. So, photosetting with monophoto seemed to be the future, but nobody seems to have told the research and development department at the Monotype Works in Salfords. They were working on something very different and also very traditional. This is type made from ironite, a synthetic polymer which replaced type metal in a specially modified monotype composition caster. Plastic type was then seen as a major innovation, a possible way forward. Lightweight, durable, these castings, which I've examined very closely, are sharp and crisp. They retain all the fine details of the Times New Roman die case, which was used for the experiment. Despite the high quality of these castings, the experiment was deemed to be a failure, and no further development work was carried out. Although there is a substantial volume of reports in a file marked experiments at the Type Archive, there is no explanation given for the decision to discontinue research into the production of plastic type. When I posted an image on Instagram, somebody came up with an explanation for the failure. Times New Roman, that's what killed it. If they'd used Garamond, Bembo or Plantain, it would have been a huge success. Thank you for your attention. I hope you've enjoyed some of these quirky items from our collections. Thank you again.